people being killed in gas chambers and firing squads and whatever is far worse than animals being killed for you know yeah, the comparisons are absurd.
My guest today is Ben Rebuck, a Jewish vegan chef and activist who runs the popular Instagram page Ben's Vegan Kitchen. In addition to his passionate work in promoting healthy and appealing vegan food, he has also used his large platform to speak out against anti-Semitism. Ben, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
So, first of all, I want to say Mazel Tov on your recent wedding.
Thank you.
Saw the photos on Instagram and stuff like that. How was that?
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, it's a blessing, I suppose, to be married, isn't it? Yeah, it was a whirlwind of a few days. We got married abroad, and yeah, we had 130 odd people come out to celebrate with us, and it was
Nice.
yeah, it was amazing. We did a Jewish wedding in a former monastery, so that was an interesting one.
Wow, how was that?
Yeah, there was as you're waiting to go down the aisle towards the chuppah, there's like 4 statues of Christ in all his different forms, and it's just like, okay, well, he was Jewish, so I guess it's all it's all part parcel. But it was it was an experience, but it was amazing. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. So look, you mentioned you're Jewish, you had a Jewish wedding. As we both know, food has always been such a large part of Jewish culture, and so it's good to see that this rich tradition is continuing regardless of dietary beliefs or restrictions. Why do you think food is so important to Jews?
I think, well, firstly, we're a hungry bunch. I think wandering the desert for 40 years probably got us all very peckish. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think intrinsically it's linked, as you say. I think if you look at the sort of celebrations and the high holidays, they are all linked around food. Even the ones where we can't eat, it's very much eat before and get together and then eat at the end. So I
yeah,
think food and Judaism is very much it goes hand in hand. It's funny because my wife is. She's half Ashkenazi, half Sephardic, and I'm fully Ashkenazi. So we always have debates and arguments about food. Ashkenazi food isn't the best, and it's a really difficult one to veganize because there's a lot of schmaltzing and
yeah,
chopping and a lot of egg, a lot of fish, a lot of meat, and yeah, it's been quite difficult to try and veganize versions of Ashkenazi food. I think Sephardic food is probably a bit easier because they use more like rice and spices and flavors. I think is the nice way. I don't want to offend any of my fellow Ashkenazis listening, but yeah, we tend to have a bit more of a blander diet than the Sephardic side. But yeah, I think it's an amazing tradition, and we have so many foods that have been passed down generations. And yeah, for me, it's been really cool to try and show people what these foods are like. And I've made recipes for latkes and chicken soup and charoset, and I made a matzah lasagna, which I wasn't too keen on, but it wasn't my recipe. But it's something good for Pesach if anyone wants a nice
yeah.
kosher for Passover and vegan matzah lasagna recipe. So
I
yeah.
like that you qualified it. Like, I made this recipe. It wasn't great. It wasn't my recipe. I didn't like it. And it wasn't mine.
No, it was something that my partner said. You've got to try this. It's really great, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
Yeah. Is your wife also vegan?
No, so she's pescatarian. Everyone's something nowadays. You can't just be like, yeah, I'm this, flexitarian, pescatarian,
Yeah.
whatever. But yeah, she eats fish. But we've been dealing with it for quite a long time, and we eat pretty similar food, and she'll eat a lot of vegan food anyway. And you know what, vegan food is great for Jews because it's all it's mostly kosher certified. And it's a good way if you want to try, milk and meat. You can make, the bolognese, and you can have it with parmesan. It's no issues. So, yeah, I think this is actually, funnily enough, she went to a Jewish school, and she's always eaten a lot of this sort of like the Tivoli brand, so like the sort of corn schnitzels and things
Yeah.
like that, like Osem and whatever. And she likes it more. She actually likes the kosher, like sort of parav or whatever people want to call it.
Yeah.
Is it parav, parv? I think everyone calls it different.
Yeah, I say parv, but my colleague will say parve, which I've never heard of in my life.
See, I don't know what's right, I don't know what's wrong, but yeah, she loves all that stuff, and actually, it's great. It's just it's a bit on the pricey side,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but yeah, it is what it is.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I went to a Jewish school and I distinctly remember, just for the sake of ease, the lunches were usually vegetarian, sometimes pescatarian, but never meat. And it's not, and that's quite common among Jewish
Mm.
schools. It's just easier to just go, you know what, we're going veggie.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the stuff now, when you eat it, you maybe don't even realize it's a vegan substitute anymore. But I mean, I think the kosher stuff does have that very distinctive. People remember it from school. It's the dinosaur shapes and the sort of schnitzels and whatnot. But they've been, we as a people have been making that really nice vegetarian food to be able to be mass bought for ages. So yeah,
Yeah.
always enjoyed it, and yeah, it still holds a very special place in my heart.
You actually said something interesting on your podcast. You said when you were transitioning to veganism, for a time, you became what you called a holiday vegan, which is being vegan at home, but eating whatever you want outside of the home. And as you were saying this, it struck me that this is how a lot of people keep kosher. Everyone sort of has their own ways of keeping kosher. I eat this, but I don't mix it with that. But in home, yes, of course. And there are some similarities I noticed between the two.
Yeah, I think it's that. I'm not throwing anyone under the bus, but I know some kosher people that when they eat out, they are not necessarily eating sort of trafe and lobsters and bacon, but they'll
Fair.
dabble occasionally. So there are probably some similarities. Technically, I just want to put on record, I didn't say myself I was a holiday vegan. I said it is a thing.
Ah, okay,
Um,
sorry.
it wasn't something that I was doing at the time. But yeah, it is certainly a thing that I think I've always been about with veganism, that it's not that militant level of you have to do it 24/7, 365 days a year, because it's difficult and life gets in the way, and you might be on holiday somewhere, which is the kind of the point that you made, that you might be on holiday somewhere and really try your best to want to eat something vegan, but you just can't, and maybe there's a bit of egg in something, or maybe there's a bit of fish or whatever, and it's okay. And I think it's the same with the kosher lifestyle, that you know Hashem's not judging you if you do break it once in a while. As long as you feel okay within yourself, and it's one of those things. So yeah, I think you're right. There are definitely some similarities with the way that people keep the diet anyway.
And it's interesting you sort of mentioned that method of, well, you're not really a proponent of you must do it 24 hours a day, 365, or nothing. Because I feel like, diving into the deep end, be it veganism or keeping kosher or whatever, that can actually put a lot of people off if they go from 0 to 100 straight away. It's sometimes easier to just ease in, and in the long term, that will yield better results.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's ironic calling it cold turkey when you're talking about going vegan. Cold tofurkey doesn't really have the same like sound to it, but yeah, I think with anything, especially when it comes to what you're putting in your body, it's difficult to just go and completely change everything that you eat. So I've always recommended to people, when I went vegan, I was living in Tel Aviv, so it was easy. The culture out there of vegan food is kind of, again, ingrained. It's a bit like what we were talking about with the schools before, is that if you think of the main food staples of Israel, you've got your sort of Israeli salads, you've got hummus, falafel, food that is naturally vegan anyway. So being vegan over there was super easy. So actually, the transition for me was cold turkey, because it was food that I was eating anyway. I just ate more of it, and yeah, eating hummus 3 or 4 times a week for me is my idea of heaven. So I never had any issues whilst I was there. But yeah, it's like anything. I think be easy on yourself, and there's no point beating yourself up over it, because life's too short to care about something all the time, 24 hours a day. So
Yeah, it's true. So how and why did you become vegan? What was the moment when you were like, I think this is for me?
well, the story that I sort of tell is that I was living in Israel, and I was living with my ex girlfriend at the time, and she became vegan, and I did a lot of the cooking. So at home, I was like, I'm gonna do the cooking, and I'm happy to eat vegan at home, because I'd grown to like some of the food. Tofu took me a while. It's pretty, it's a slow burner, tofu. I always say it's the same as a piece of chicken breast, though. You would never just be like, oh, it's my first time trying chicken breast, I'm going to cook it plain and then eat it, because it's going to taste horrible. So with tofu, tofu's the same. You need to marinate it. You need to give it that same love and energy that you would a piece of meat. And actually, tofu absorbs flavor even better than chicken, in my opinion. But yeah, I was eating a lot of vegan food at home, and I found that when I was going out to eat, I wasn't choosing the meat options, and I thought that I would. I thought that I would be like, yeah, I'll have the chicken or the fish or whatever. But I just kept finding myself here or there choosing the kind of the vegan option. Um, and I remember it was about maybe 3 or 4 months after I'd sort of been vegan. I was going on a trip to Madrid, which was actually 5 years ago because it came up in my Facebook memories yesterday. It was 5 years ago yesterday that I was in Madrid, and I went there for a football game. Met some friends. We went to watch the football, and I was only there for 2 days. And I was like, you know what, Spain's a great country to eat. You know, they have amazing like fish and paella and all maybe very non-kosher things, what they're known for over there. And I was like, I'm just going to eat it, like whatever, I'm only there for a couple of days. But then actually my brain did a sort of complete 360 and said, well, you are only there for a couple of days, so what if you eat this and then become really ill and then you've ruined your whole trip? So I was like, okay, I'm not going to eat it, because I want to enjoy myself. So Spain is very, very difficult to be vegan. As someone who's just been there for 3 weeks, I can assure you it's really, really not easy. I've got to stop going back to Spain as it goes. But yeah, that was 2 or 3 days of just eating pretty much chips and bread with tomato, which is fine. Yeah, it wasn't the best diet. I didn't come back feeling the greatest, but yeah, effectively, I just got scared. I got scared of eating meat or cheese or whatever because I knew that my stomach had changed and I was worried how it was going to affect me. And it's been 5 and a bit years since then, and I'm still worried about the effects. And my body's completely become lactose intolerant. It's crazy what you do when you have a withdrawal. I mean, I used to eat cheese and drink milk and everything, but yeah, I now can tell because I've been served dairy before, like by mistake, and I've had it in food and I have not realised. But yeah,
Yeah.
straight away when you become lactose intolerant and you have cheese or you have milk, you know instantly because yeah, it's not a pretty it's not a pretty sight. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of those things. So yeah, I'm still worried about what would happen if I started eating cheese or meat or whatever. And yeah, here I am, still living and breathing.
Well, look, it's clearly working for you. You post some amazing recipes online, and people become vegan and vegetarian for so many reasons. And it sounds like yours is primarily driven by health. Is that fair to say?
um, I think it was health at the beginning because I noticed that I could kind of eat the same version of a meal and not feel the same way. So, like for example, burgers. I'm not a huge fan of burgers, which I know is quite a surprising thing to say because everyone seems to love burgers. But I've never been like, they're fine, but nowadays they just make them as big as possible, and you can't eat them. And I just find the whole thing, yeah, a bit of a pain. But whenever I used to eat a burger, like a beef and cheeseburger, whatever, um, I would always leave a restaurant feeling so lethargic and just feeling awful, and I would have to always like walk it off, and I would never be able to sleep, and it always annoyed me. But I would go out and eat a vegan version. There was a place on Ibn Gurur in Tel Aviv called Rainbow Burger, and they do this like again, it's a bit of a stupid. It's like a double or a triple, and I went there for the first time. I was like, these burgers are meant to be amazing. I got this double vegan cheeseburger with chips and a drink, and I remember being like, oh, I'm going to regret this. But then I got up and I just walked away and I was like, hang on, I feel absolutely fine. So it was that realization that actually maybe it wasn't the burgers, it was the meat. And that obviously wasn't agreeing with my body. Um, so it was, I guess you would call it a level of health that I could eat, like I said, the same foods, but still feel kind of better at myself. And actually, for ages on a vegan diet, I was kind of eating quite unhealthily, but finding that I wasn't gaining weight. I realized during lockdown that actually it wasn't because I was vegan, it was because I was exercising. So when
Ah,
I was eating a vegan diet and not exercising, I gained weight very easily. So uh, yeah, it's one of those things that I think people presume it's healthy, but is a lot of processed foods that if you swap your normal meat for vegan meat and your cheese for vegan cheese, if you just eat that, you're going to gain weight. So yeah, it's only healthy when you eat your pulses and your grains and your vegetables and your tofus and tempehs and things like that. But yeah, I did it initially for health, but actually you sort of grow to understand about the sort of animal agricultural industry and how that yeah, how that world runs, and you realize it's a bit yeah, I don't want to sound like a preachy vegan, but you see these things and you think, well, I don't necessarily agree with it, so I'm happy I'm happy being in this situation where I'm not eating this food because, you know, it's not necessarily something that I want to kind of be a part of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally, totally. Now, your Instagram page, it's not only a great resource for vegan content. If people go on your page and they look in the story highlights, there's a section called activism with a mug and David with the Star of David on it. When and why did you start using your platform to speak about anti-Semitism?
When I couldn't tell you because it's been something that I've always kind of discussed. You know, I'm always very open about the fact that I'm Jewish. I think it's one of those things that, you know, I feel awful saying it, but, you know, people have a conception or a misconception really of how Jews should look. So I often get told you don't look Jewish, which is, you know, I understand it. It's not something that necessarily is the truth, but, you know, I don't know what people mean when they, well, look, I do know what they mean, but it's one of those things that I always get told that I don't look Jewish. So I think I've always kind of maybe gone out of my way to be a bit more overt about it, to be like, oh, you know, I might not have the features that you associate with Judaism, but I am, and I'm proud of it. And, you know, I've got a Magen David tattoo, and I've got other sort of Israel slash Jewish tattoos. So I've always talked about it, and I've always been open about it. But from an activism point of view, I think it was only maybe a year or two ago, and things were happening in the media, and, you know, with Israel, and, you know, it's always sort of a like a seismic shock of something very small happened, then it grows and grows. And I guess being present on, you know, I don't classify myself as left wing. I don't classify myself as anything really, but being in the vegan world, obviously it is quite a, you know, a very left wing place, and a lot of people on the very hard left as well. I went to Tel Aviv actually the beginning of this year with a friend of mine, and we made like a whole mini content series. And on some of the videos, I just said, look, let's just turn the comments off now, because it's been months of people just sending abuse and, you know, getting DMs from people, you know, swearing at me and, you know, calling me Zionist pig and whatever. And I just block these people because there's no point responding to everyone and rising to it. But yeah, I think it's important. I think, you know, I'm very lucky to have a platform that I've built based on food. But for me, I've always said it's naive um, uh, to have the ability to do good in the world, and not kind of use it to benefit it. You know, look, I'm not spewing hate. I'm not trying to convert people to Judaism or make people feel like they're Zionistic or whatever. But I'm telling them my story and my opinion, and kind of what I feel. And if they want to listen, great. If they want to unfollow me and block me, that's also absolutely fine. But for me, it's part of who I am, and I think it's a really important thing to do.
Yeah. You mentioned just a second ago that you know, it's maybe not unfair to say that, you know, a lot of people in the vegan community are on the left, or the hard left. You've said that you have called for people to, quote, include the Jewish faith in their activism. Um, do you feel that anti-Semitism gets overlooked among activists?
You know, I'd seen a pretty large vegan influencer talking about, you know, all these different people to follow from different backgrounds, and you had, and yeah, I had no issue with it, of course, but there were, you know, people from every sort of background, and there were people with disabilities, and there was LGBT and everything, but there was no Jewish people. And I remember being like, well, hang on a sec, you're saying that we should follow these people because they're from marginalized and, you know, different backgrounds and whatever, but actually Jews are one of the biggest minorities in this country. You know, we're 0.1% of the population, and I think people don't realize it. It's one of my favorite games to play. Is I ask people, how many Jews do you think there are in the United Kingdom, and what percentage of the population do you think it is? And I've heard, honestly, I think the biggest answer I got was about 15 million, which is insane. But
There's
it
not
just goes,
15 million Jews in the world.
well, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think for people to have this misconception, a lot of people, you know, I think I grew up in London, and, you know, you would have a misconception of I think how multicultural England is, because it actually, as a country, it's not very multicultural at all. It's London, it's Birmingham, it's Manchester, it's Leeds, and that's kind of it. You know, there's not many other people from different, you know, backgrounds in many of the other places across the country. And you go to a countryside village, you're not going to meet many other people who aren't white British people. So growing up in London, I can understand. I have friends who live in Hackney and friends who live in North London, so they know Golders Green, they know Stamford Hill, they see Jews and they know Jews and they're friends with Jews, so they presume that they're, we're a big part of this society, but we're not. And as a minority, I think we're overlooked when it comes to anti-Semitism. I mean, we've got our own word for it, so it obviously is a big deal. It's not part of racism, but yeah, I think the fact that the majority of us are seen as white middle class, it's like, oh, you can kind of deal with it yourself and get over it and you'll be fine. You haven't had the struggles of the other people. When actually, I think a lot of Jews that I know, we have had a lot of privilege, and I'm fully understanding of the white privilege, because it's completely different to the privilege that other ethnicities have. But yeah, anti-Semitism is a huge problem, and it's something that seems to be growing year on year, and not going away. And we need more people to talk about it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, is anti-Semitism something that you have ever witnessed or experienced yourself?
Yeah, 100%. I think I'd be surprised to meet any Jew in this country who hasn't, or who's not willing to admit it, unfortunately. But this is kind of what got me into. I've always been very interested in Judaism, and I had a bar mitzvah, and my grandma's lived in Israel for nearly 45 years, so we grew up there in the summers and the Pesach and Hanukkah. Like, we would go every sort of high holiday to Israel, so I've always been linked to it. But I was never interested necessarily in the um, I don't want to call it like a materialistic aspect, but that very stereotypical Northwest London Jewish lifestyle. It was something that I avoided much of my life because I wasn't so interested in it. It felt very, like I say, materialistic and kind of false. So I shied away from it. I didn't go to Jewish school. I avoided kind of those people that I grew up around. And then I moved to Israel and I knew no one. So it was kind of my own doing, but en malasot, as they say over there. But yeah, I think I went to non-Jewish schools, and it was about the time around, I think, 2008, 2009. It was around the time of the flotilla incident with Israel and Egypt, and I was going to a sixth form college in London, in sort of near around Kentish Town, Tufnell Park, which is where I was living at the time. And yeah, I was friends with a lot of people from all over the place, and it didn't matter. I had Lebanese friends, Egyptian friends. I was friends with a lot of young Arab Muslims who were British, but had all been born in the Middle East, and we were good friends. We'd play football and we'd hang out and whatever. But when that happened, once the flotilla happened, and people automatically just were like, right, Israel here is at fault for something. Um, I started getting a lot of abuse from people because they presumed it was something to do with me. And I remember when it happening, when it started happening, I didn't really know a lot about Israeli politics and around the situation over there, and seeing the abuse that I got for supporting it, being like, well, I'm sure there's two sides to this story. The things that people would say to me, there would be references to like the Holocaust and all sorts of things. So yeah, there was a lot of that, and instead of trying to fight fire with fire, I actually went away and was like, now is my time to actually understand this situation. And I educated myself, because for me it was, I'm not going to have fistfights with people. I'm going to outsmart them and know more about the situation than they will. So I kind of really found my Jewish Zionistic aspect in life at that point. I did all of that, and then like I said, I found Judaism and Zionism sort of again, and became more proud of it. Moved to Israel, made Aliyah, lived there for nearly 3 years, and it's still the picture behind me. This is the Tel Aviv, like sort of like the shoreline or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, it's still got a very special place in my heart, and it is because of anti-Semitism. The other point I should make is that also I'm a Chelsea fan, and I'm a Chelsea season ticket holder, and as a club, we are not great. So I've seen a lot of, not necessarily directed at me, but I've seen and heard a lot of anti-Semitism at football, and it's one of those things that is sort of, you're expected to take with a pinch of salt. But there have been a few times where it's sort of gone too far, and I've had confrontations with people about what they've been saying. So yeah, unfortunately, I've experienced a great deal of it in the last sort of 15 years or so.
When you're at school, and you don't really know what's going on in Israel, and someone invokes references about the Holocaust, what is your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. I was a bit hot headed when I was younger, so I would I would probably give it back, and I would say stupid things back to these people, which isn't, But when you're a kid, how you don't know what to do, which is why I said, I took myself away and educated myself in the situation rather than just, reverting to kind of throwing back insults. I was like, well, actually, did you know that this happened, or did you know that actually what you're saying isn't true? And yeah, it's not nice. I have a lot of people actually message me on social media about how to deal with anti-Semitism, and it's a difficult thing to give advice about because obviously um, it's very personal to the individual. As far as I'm aware, which I know it's not true, but from my immediate family, there was no one that we've managed to necessarily trace back to having been, having perished in the Holocaust era. I think a lot of my family had left. That being said, I'm, my dad's side of the family are Polish, and there's no way that anyone that I was related to just managed to avoid that situation, because it was even there were all the pogroms before there in Poland, which I think affected my family, which is why they ended up over here in the UK. But I don't I don't necessarily feel. I think look, the Holocaust, we're all intrinsically linked to it, and it's something that we feel within all of us. But it's not necessarily something that I've ever felt like, oh, this has 100% personally affected me
Yeah.
as I am as a human in this day and age. But it's something that I know, my grandparents' generation and probably my parents' generation, they all seem to be pretty messed up. So it must be from being the kids of people who were around in that era. So
Yeah.
yeah, I try and tell people just to ignore it and not take it to heart. But who am I to tell them how to feel, like how words and how situations can make them feel? So
Yeah, I mean, it sort of reminds me one comparison that I have noticed from the vegan and vegetarian community is comparisons between eating meat or industrialized farming and the Holocaust, which, from my perspective, is neither an accurate nor particularly compassionate comparison to make. Why do you think this comparison is often made? And do you think that the people making the comparison are conscious of the fact that they could be seen to be minimalizing the Holocaust?
yeah, I mean, you put it far more eloquently than I would have done, because my wording around that situation is far different. It's one of those things that I've seen people say it, and then it's been a like sending them a message straight away, and not holding back, being like, how dare you talk about it in this way? Because at the end of the day, I am vegan, and I think it's terrible what happens to pigs and sheep and cows and chickens. But 1,000 chickens or 1,000,000 cows is not worth one human life, in my opinion, because we're different. We're a different species. Maybe not 1,000,000 cows. I think that was a bit of a over exaggeration, but humans are more important than animals, and that is a fact of life. So, you know, people being killed in gas chambers and firing squads and whatever is far worse than animals being killed for, yeah. The comparisons are absurd, and using shock tactics is one thing, but when it relates to one of the greatest genocides in the history of the human race, then it's not something that I appreciate people doing. And yeah, I've had quite a few arguments with people that I've seen do it, but thankfully now I don't follow too many of these ridiculous activists, because yeah, it's the shock factor. It doesn't actually work for me, and it doesn't yeah, especially when it comes to the Holocaust. It's stupid.
Yeah, I mean, when this is pointed out to people, is that do most of them say, "Oh, yeah, sorry, I get it now," or is it sort of a doubling down thing, or how do they react?
I remember having an argument with some guy. I can't remember his name, some irrelevant person, but he was quite big on social media, and he wouldn't double down. And he started posting about me on his stories, being like, "Oh, he cares more about, um, you know, humans than animals, and he's like not a real vegan and all this." I was like, "What's wrong with you?" I mean,
Wow.
not in those words. I told him to disappear where the sun doesn't shine, in one or a better way. But yeah, I think look, social media. I'm one of these people that I don't understand a lot of the I'm not a millennial, but I have to try and understand millennials. Or well, actually, maybe I am a millennial, but is it Gen Z, like this new
Oh, there's
generation
so
of
many. I think it
yeah?
is Gen
There's
Z.
it is Gen Z, so maybe I am millennial and they are Gen Z. But yeah, this whole kind of getting triggered by things that you see on social media. Like, my personal opinion is that I don't really get it, because if something winds me up or if it irritates me, I just block that person and I don't engage in the content. So if I see something that really irritates me, I'll remove myself from that situation and remove them from. So when people message me about Palestine, I'm like, well, I can argue with you and I can tell you that messaging a 31-year-old Jew from northwest London to free Palestine isn't actually going to make a difference. I can tell you that, but I'd rather just block you and get on with my day. So yeah, I think when I've experienced these things, it is a case of removing myself from the situation because, yeah, I can revisit my hot-headed youth and get really involved with it, and it's not necessary because yeah, there's only 24 hours in a day, and I'd rather not waste them on people who yeah wouldn't waste it on me. So
I think that's sensible.
mm.
Now, earlier we were talking about food in Jewish culture. It's interesting because anti-Semitism has actually influenced the food that Jews eat to quite a large degree. I mean, one example is that we eat matzah at Pesach, when we tell the story of our exodus from Egypt and our escape from slavery. And at Purim, we eat hamantaschen, which is cookies resembling the ear or the hat of Haman, the man who tried to murder us. Why do you think that we've incorporated our experiences of anti-Semitism into food in this way?
It is funny, isn't it? When you put it so black and white like that, it's just everything is just food related, isn't it? Well, there's that chart that goes around now, which is the holiday chart, which is like they tried to kill us so we don't eat, or they tried to kill us so we eat, which is always a funny one. But yeah, why have we? I think it's just a way of, I guess, connecting and I think Judaism is all about traditions and keeping up those traditions. So yeah, I think for us, making sure that we're um, connecting to the past. Someone actually said something of that ilk to me about why they go to shul and why they say the Shema and whatnot. And they said, well, it's putting me in the same place as my ancestors of 2,000, 3,000, however many years ago. Like we're doing the same thing and the same traditions, and it's an amazing feeling to feel like you're so connected to history just by praying or benching after meals or saying the brachot. So yeah, I think food is the same thing. It's amazing that we can still, after all these years, have these traditions and keep up with them. And the fact that we're still eating matzah when it tastes just as bad as it does is a real amazing thing. I think we should be credited for eating such an awful food all the time.
Yeah, our ancestors would have been like, "This is still disgusting."
Yeah, I'm sure. I hope so. Yeah, it's one of my least favorite foods out there.
And they didn't even have the luxury of your matzah lasagna recipe.
No, they probably got away with that one, to be honest.
I do want to ask, what is your favorite Jewish vegan recipe?
um, I think the one that I've made where I've been like, right, this is really good, has been latkes, because actually latkes really can be made vegan very easily. I think normally they'll have egg in them, but if you can remove the egg. But yeah, I made these latkes for Pesach, which I understand, they're not actually a Pesach food, but I was just trying to make any sort of. I did a mini series of just trying to make Jewish foods, and latkes were just, yeah, I wanted to eat them. So yeah, but I
It's
was
good enough
shocked at.
reason.
Exactly, it's a great reason. But yeah, I was shocked at how good they were and how easy they were. So I would definitely say they went down a treat. I've got to also say my wife's vegan chicken soup, because if she's going to listen, she'll kill me for not saying it. But actually, she does a great vegan chicken soup, and even the matzo balls are vegan. So yeah, I'd say I'd eat the two together, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I want to ask you a question, which I ask all of our guests, which is if someone approaches you and they say they want to help in the fight against anti-Semitism, they're not Jewish, they may not know loads about anti-Semitism or Judaism. What should they do?
It's a good question. I would always sort of, you know, I would always tell people to go and research and understand what it is that they want to help with. I think social media is actually a great resource from an educational point of view. There's a few people I follow, like Chen Mazik, who does a lot of amazing stuff around Zionism. There's a girl, I think her Instagram is like Roots Metal or something like that. She's a really amazing, person when it comes to discussing issues of Jewish history and where the anti-Semitism stems from. So, of course, I'd love more people to talk about anti-Semitism and to, you know, see how it affects them from the outside. Actually, it's funny. A friend of mine who came to my wedding, not Jewish, nothing at all. He's a podcast producer. He works for a pretty well known podcast with a couple of the people who do, like, they're part of the Sidemen. So he himself has become, as the producer of the podcast, like a character. And he was at my wedding, and he had a picture, and he was wearing kippot and whatever. And they have like there's all these like forums, whatever, because these guys are huge. They're massive, and someone wrote on one of these Reddit forums about them, being like, "Oh, Callum, how come you're a Chelsea fan? You're Jewish, aren't you? Shouldn't you be a Tottenham fan?" And he told me it, and I was like, "Well, firstly, that's absurd that someone has said that, but secondly, welcome to how casual anti-Semitism is, and you experienced now your first anti-Semitic abuse, and you're not even Jewish, so." Welcome to the club. So I think obviously he's completely understanding of it, and he was like, yeah, it wasn't nice to have someone make these kind of like crass assumptions about me just because of a religion that I'm not even a part of. So
Yeah.
yeah, but that just goes to show how easy it is to kind of continue those things. But yeah, to go back to the question and actually give the answer, I would say have a look on social media and find some creators that you agree with. Actually, I would also suggest reading Jews Don't Count by David Baddiel, because I think that has been the most eye-opening resource for a couple of people that I've sent to, because they don't realize any of this stuff happens and how casually ingrained it is into society. I mean, Jew is an adjective in the dictionary. To Jew someone is to basically wrong them financially, to kind of steal from them and defraud them in a way. So that shows how ingrained it is in society and how acceptable it is. So yeah, I would definitely read that book. It's an amazing book.
Yeah, and I'm going to plug the podcast. If you want to hear behind it, the book, check out our podcast with David Baddiel. He was the first ever episode. I would certainly check that out. And also, just to add to your thing about Jew as an adjective, also as a verb. I'm not really a football guy, so I'm not really familiar with the lingo as such. But when I play FIFA with friends or whatever, and when I first heard Jew goal, I was like, "What is this?"
Yeah.
Like, can you explain what Jew goal is for the listeners?
So effectively, it's when you're kind of one on one with the goalkeeper, and instead of trying to score normally, you pass it to another player, sort of on your left or right, to score like an easy open goal. So it's considered, again, yeah, everyone calls it a Jew goal. I mean, we used to call it a sweaty goal, which I think was a bit more of a nicer way of putting it. But yeah, a Jew goal is something now that they call, because it's easy and it's cheap. It's like a cheap, easy way to score a goal in FIFA. So yeah, again, yeah, it's all part of society, isn't it?
Yeah. Ben, I really want to thank you for coming on the podcast. Before you go, please tell the listeners what have you got coming up and where can people find you?
What do I have coming up? It's a good question. Not much. I'm trying to keep busy, making new recipes. So if you are interested in not just vegan food, but just food in general, because it is just food. It's not just because it's vegan. Yeah, it's Ben's Vegan Kitchen on Instagram and also TikTok. I'm a member of the Plant Boys. If you want to check out the Plant Boys as well, we're like a vegan collaborative of 9 different males from all different backgrounds, and we talk about all sorts of different things, not just about vegan food, also about societal issues and things like that. So yeah, check us out, and yeah, it's been great. It's been great chatting. I really appreciate you having me on. It's really great to talk about something that I'm really passionate about, and it's great that people listen, and hopefully make a bit more of an understanding of what it's like being Jewish in this day and age.
Absolutely. Ben, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Against Anti-Semitism.
Thank you very much.